Did you miss me? Richard Linklater's 2019 film adaptation of Where'd You Go, Bernadette should be for the popular fiction girlies what Tim Burton's 2007 film adaptation of Sweeney Todd the Demon Barber of Fleet Street is for musical theater kids, which is to say that it is toothless, humorless, kind of misogynistic, and willfully missing the point, and we all deserved better and basically everybody at least kind of senses it, but the context of the source material is necessary to properly explain why, and those of us who have that context should and will die mad about it. You are about to become one of us. Prepare yourself. The book is not always better. Change is necessary and inherent to the act of translating a story from one medium to another. An unfaithful adaptation does not always make for a bad piece of art, and indeed can make for a great one. A fresh take on a story with a different focus or aim, or even active beef with the original telling, can make for a fascinating and beautiful thing all its own, but good God, sometimes it done gets danged all to heck and it hurts me in my motherforking soul. That's what this video is. This is not a deep dive, this is an extremely shallow wade in the tide pools. I make no pretense that this is a meaningful contribution to society. It is 2025 and I live in the United States of America and I need a thread to hang by, and I'm guessing a lot of you do too. And for whatever reason, this is the one I've got to offer to myself and to you. Stay alive, chaos reigns. Part 1, Where'd You Go, Bernadette, subheading 2012 novel by Maria Semple. Where'd You Go, Bernadette is a 2012 epistolary comedy novel by Maria Semple, which is to say that it is told in emails and news articles and transcripts and various other documents and stuff, and it's fucking funny, obviously. It was a New York Times bestseller for at least 50 weeks in paperback alone, and was, to quote a 2014 profile in the Aspen Daily News, a book club favorite and a critical darling, which is not something that I needed the Aspen Daily News to tell me. I mean, the critical darling part maybe, but this book is extremely Reese's Book Club coded. It has big read with Jenna energy. It's like the literary equivalent of 6 suburban moms sprawled across the living room after the kids have gone to bed with as many open bottles of butter Chardonnay. I found it abandoned in a little free library and dragged it around across 2 moves before finally getting around to cracking it, at which point I tore through it in literally 1 day. Butter Chardonnay is tasty as hell, and I am just never going to be friends with anyone who is not woman enough to say so. Glass is not permitted in the unhinged zone, for my safety and yours. Part 2, film. Film is a medium of storytelling that is inherently collaborative, perhaps even more so than any other art form. It is nigh impossible to nail any one choice in a film down to one person, with the number of hands that absolutely must touch every single inch of every single thing about it. And it is further impossible to break down entirely from without, and in retrospect, to what extent any individual element is due to a deliberate artistic choice, and to what extent it is due to the buckets on buckets of practical concerns and limitations involved in making 23.976 hats per second where there never were any hats. Every finished film is a miracle that turns the blood, sweat, and tears of innumerable people to wine. Of varying quality, but wine nonetheless. Why are you saying all of this, Laura? Part 3, Richard Linklater. Richard Linklater is a renowned writer-director who many would go ahead and call an auteur for pulling shit like taking 11 years to shoot a movie so the audience can see its star grow up along with his character over the course of the film. He's best known to most people for a bunch of movies that I know I should have seen but haven't gotten around to yet because there are simply too many movies. He's best known to me for School of Rock, which is an all-time never not in the mood for it watch, and Suburbia, which I love because I played Erica in a production of the Eric Bogosian play it's based on right after I graduated college, and I'm extremely nostalgic about it. Linklater is due a lot of respect as an artist and whatnot, and is categorically not single-handedly responsible for like probably anything about this movie, with 6 credited producers, including Maria Semple herself, and 3 credited screenwriters, the non-Linklaters of whom had exactly 1 other shared writing credit between them at the time of this film's release, which is honestly kind of impressive, and none of whom were part of the first team announced to be writing the thing, so who knows what, if any, leftovers they got saddled with. But I am about to be very mean by just going ahead and letting Richard Linklater serve as the figurehead of this absolute faceplant of an adaptation, even though I have no idea what was and was not actually his fault. 2025, chaos reigns, I think his reputation can take it. Part 4, Where'd You Go, Bernadette, parentheses, film, subheading 2019 American comedy drama film by Richard Linklater. Where'd You Go, Bernadette is a 2019 film based on the 2012 novel of the same name by Maria Semple, directed by Richard Linklater, written by Linklater, Holly Gent, and Vince Palmo, and starring Cate Blanchett, Billy Crudup, and Emma Nelson, among others. The rights were acquired by Annapurna Pictures and Color Force in 2013, with Scott Neustadter and Michael H. Weber attached to write, and boy howdy would I like to Raccacoonie my way into the universe where I can watch 500 Days of Bernadette, because that sounds fascinating. Gent and Palmo took over the screenplay in 2016, with Linklater ultimately credited as well. Principal photography began in 2017, and the movie was originally scheduled for release in May 2018, but was pushed back several times before finally hitting theaters in August of 2019, at which point point, it flopped hard. It was number 11 at the box office that weekend, grossing $3.46 million and went on to make not quite 11 million total worldwide, against a budget reportedly over 20 million. Critical reception wasn't particularly stellar either, with the movie sitting at 50% fresh on Rotten Tomatoes and 51 on Metacritic. Add to that a pretty smooth curve of a 3.1 average on Letterboxd, and we're pretty much looking at the definition of fine. But reader, it is not fine. Part 5. Where'd You Go, Bernadette Basics. Where'd You Go, Bernadette is the story of Bernadette Fox, a MacArthur Genius Grant-winning Los Angeles architect turned Seattle stay-at-home mom preparing for a family trip to Antarctica at the request of her daughter Bea. In the course of the preparations, Bernadette's husband, Microsoft product designer and viral TED talker Elgin Branch, begins to develop concerns about her mental state, which was already functionally agoraphobic, based on a series of escalating incidents that largely amount to misunderstandings. This all comes to a head when Elgin stages an intervention with the goal of getting Bernadette to agree to inpatient mental health care days before the Antarctica trip, and instead, Bernadette disappears without a trace from a locked bathroom. The rest of the story is Bea's attempt to piece together Where'd You Go, Bernadette, with the eventual discovery that she escaped the bathroom through the window with the surprise help of her neighbor nemesis Audrey, went on the Antarctica trip assuming the rest of the family would be there too, stuck with it even when it was clear that they weren't, and has ended up with a plan to rekindle her architectural career by designing a research base at the South Pole. That was a deceptively hard summary to write. Everyone please clap. Part 6. Good things. As is tradition, we open on my half-hearted attempt to say something nice about this godforsaken movie, and I have managed 4 points. 1. The existence of Cate Blanchett. This woman is a miracle. She manages to constantly be in a completely different movie from everyone else, and I would much prefer to watch the movie she is in. Bonus points for the part where she affects an Irish accent as a joke that is clearly only funny to her when she gets more emotional than she's able to deal with.
'Tis a piteous fate to have befallen a MacArthur genius, wouldn't you say?
I just want to look at your gorgeous face every day, but a little wave every now and then would sure warm a mum's heart.
She did that last part sounding like a leprechaun.
I would bet money that did not come from the direction or writing of Linklater, Ghent, or Palmo. 2. The house. The Fox Branch residence is essentially a character in the book. It's a former Catholic girls' school designated as a historic site and therefore unable to be torn down, so it's in massive disrepair, but Bernadette was able to get it for cheap with the assumption that, you know, she's a MacArthur genius architect whose whole thing is figuring out cool stuff to do with existing structures and materials. It's a project that's right up her alley. But then Seattle life, multiple miscarriages, major depression, it's been 20 years and the building is still a wreck. The location used in this movie is perfection. You get the vibe instantly. It's gorgeous. There is so much personality to this house, and all the piles of junk in every random corner, juxtaposed with gothic-looking architecture and the massive industrial kitchen and the high ceilings you can hear in the way the sound is treated.
LG? Whatever this is, can we talk about it privately?
It's beautiful. 3. The towels in the pots. This is taken from one of Bernadette's Band-Aid solutions that have become permanent fixes in this massive house that she is never going to actually renovate and is full of leaks that are a huge problem because they live in Seattle.
First, we lay out plastic bags under the leaks and cover them with towels or moving blankets. Then we put a spaghetti pot in the middle to catch the water. The trash bags are necessary because it might leak for hours in one place. Then move over 2 inches. Mom's piece de resistance is putting an old t-shirt inside the spaghetti pot to muffle the drip, 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 because that can drive you crazy when you're trying to sleep.
Then at the end of the book, this is how Bea knows she's in the right place to find her missing mom.
On the floor was a spaghetti pot sitting atop a flattened out trash bag. Inside the spaghetti pot was a t-shirt with something familiar on it. A rainbow handprint. I reached down and picked it out of the cold, gray water. Gaylor Street School.
The movie handles this in my favorite kind of way, which is actually to make it even subtler. Not so subtle that it becomes no more than a wink where people familiar with the source material are gonna get it and everyone else will either miss it or be like, what's that doing there?
You do realize that lunch is the most important meal of the day.
Thought it was breakfast.
Some people say that, but you know, it's just a theory.
But subtle enough that you feel smart as a viewer for noticing and understanding what's going on. In an early scene where Bea is asking about the Antarctica trip, we see Bernadette put a towel in a pot and we hear the way that it muffles the dripping sound.
Now I want something completely different.
Then at the end, when Bea and Elgin are looking for Bernadette, they find a bucket with a towel in it and exchange a look. And that's all you need. You get it. That's Bernadette's thing, so Bernadette must be here. Number 4, Time After Time. This is an adaptation of a pair of references in the book to The Runaway Bunny by Margaret Wise Brown, which for anyone whose childhood was a long time ago or very different from mine, is a picture book about a young bunny telling his mother increasingly creative ways he's going to run away from her, and the mother coming up with increasingly creative ways she'll find him if he does.
If you run after me, said the little bunny, I will become a fish in a trout stream. and I will swim away from you.
If you become a fish in a trout stream, said his mother, I will become a fisherman, and I will fish for you.
If you become a fisherman, said the little bunny, I will become a rock on the mountain, high above you.
If you become a rock on the mountain high above me, said his mother, I will be a mountain climber, and I will climb to where you are.
The first reference comes from a section narrated by Bee shortly after she's been accepted to a fancy boarding school for senior high.
But really, it's fine with me if you run off. I'll still see you every day.
I glowered at her.
Oh, didn't I tell you? I'm going to move to Wallingford and rent a house off campus. I already got a job working in the Choate dining hall.
Don't even joke.
You have no choice in it. You're like the runaway bunny. There's no way for you to get away from me.
And then this idea comes back in Bernadette's letter to Bee from Antarctica at the very end of the book.
My second proclamation, you are not going away to boarding school. Sorry, but you have no choice. You're sticking with me, with us, close to home. And I don't want to hear it from the runaway bunny. The runaway bunny stays.
While the superficial meaning of both of these allusions is the same, in the context of the narrative, the second is deeply impactful because it lands after Bee has, well, for one, she's already started and left boarding school, so it's less agency-defying than it might sound. But more importantly, she's been the one to find the missing Bernadette. So they've swapped places. Bernadette has become the runaway bunny, and Bee has taken on the role of the mother, who goes to extraordinary lengths to track her down. The movie cuts this particular reference but replaces it with one that I think is both a great use of the change in medium and a very competent adjustment for the different relationship Bee and Bernadette have in this version of the story. In the book, these characters have a somewhat antagonistic dynamic typical of teenagerdom that we can see from Bee's narration is rooted in a frustrated but genuine and deep love between two impossibly witty people whose love language is banter.
There's no way for you to get away from me. I'll be lurking behind the sneeze guards with my gloves, serving hamburgers on Wednesdays, fish on Fridays.
Dad, make her stop.
Bernadette, please.
Both of you think I'm joking. Fine. Think that.
So the dynamic of the runaway bunny takes on a fun tone. Like, it's an improv game of one-upmanship rather than like a harrowing tale of a parent actually infringing on her child's freedom. Both Bernadette and Bee are far more earnest characters in the film, which I'm not going to say I necessarily like as a change, but I do appreciate that this reference that doesn't quite fit anymore has been swapped out for one that does in the Cyndi Lauper ballad Time After Time. First, we get a scene of Bee and Bernadette singing along to it while driving in the rain, so it takes on almost a foreshadowing quality, and both actresses turn in really sweet performances. And then the song comes back to underscore the credits when Bernadette has been lost and Bee has looked and she did find her. Oh, actually one other thing. I like that the movie cuts the Christianity thread that runs through a handful of plot lines. It's complex and nuanced, and I mostly think it's a perfectly solid side element of the book, but there was exactly one way for it to shake out in this particular adaptation, which would have been like turning the whole thing into basically an entry in the God's Not Dead franchise, which would have been worse than what we got. Faint praise though, because Jesus Christ the apple tree does what we got suck ass. Part 7, Suspense. A common complaint about both versions of this story is that it promises a mystery about a missing person who doesn't even go missing until the end of the second act. This is a criticism I understand, but mostly do not agree with. I think if you are a plot-first kind of reader expecting a plot-first kind of mystery, this book is probably going to disappoint you, but I also kind of feel like that's probably a you problem. Like, okay, here's the bit of the summary on the back of my copy that references this.
Bernadette is on the brink of a meltdown. As disaster follows disaster, she disappears, leaving her family to pick up the pieces, which is exactly what Bee does, weaving together emails, invoices, and school memos to reveal the secret past that Bernadette has been hiding for decades. Where Do You Go, Bernadette is an ingeniously entertaining novel about a family coming to terms with who they are, and the power of a daughter's love for her imperfect mother.
Character, character, character. Let's go ahead and combine that with my favorite way to judge a book by its cover, which is the most highlighted blurbs. On the back here, we have in large print an uproarious comedy of manners. That's from Mark Haddon at People. And on the front up here, we have a quote from Taffy Brodesser Ackner's favorite anti-beach reader himself, Jonathan Goddamn Franzen. I don't want to be an asshole here, but if you got your hands on this book thinking it was going to be like a thriller, even a literary thriller, and especially if you then read the first 50 or so pages and you didn't just kind of go, oh, okay, that wasn't what I was looking for, and move on to something else that was, motherfucker, that is on you. I think this might be part of a genre of criticism that I just don't really get, where people latch onto something that to me will feel pretty superficial, and then they feel like personally betrayed when the book doesn't do or have it. Don't get me wrong, I think it's totally fine to have relatively minor things that you're attracted to in stories and to put a book down when it turns out not to be that.
This should have been right up my alley because I love
Nuns. I love reading about nuns. Put it down at 30% because there were like no nuns. There was one nun.
That is the correct response. Well done. I hope you found a book with more nuns. But being like righteously indignant that Bernadette doesn't go anywhere for the first 200 pages of a book called Where'd You Go, Bernadette, when the descriptor agoraphobic is applied to Bernadette in the first sentence of the summary, I think is an example of why this flavor of reaction is less of a criticism and more of a customer service complaint. And in the case of this particular novel, it's also a skill issue. I direct you to the opening page of the thing.
The first annoying thing is when I ask Dad what he thinks happened to Mom. He always says, "What's most important is for you to understand it's not your fault." You'll notice that wasn't even the question. When I press him, he says the second most annoying thing. The truth is complicated. There's no way one person can ever know everything about another person. Mom disappears into thin air 2 days before Christmas without telling me? Of course it's complicated. Just because it's complicated, just because you think you can't ever know everything about another person, it doesn't mean you can't try. It doesn't mean I can't try.
Mom disappears into thin air on the first page. Waiting for her to disappear is the fucking point, you absolute donkey. You don't have to like it. You can simply take it back to the library if it wasn't what you were looking for. Nobody is making you finish it, but it could not be more clear what is going on here, and you don't get to pretend that you're smarter than the book because you came in with the wrong expectations despite having been given all the right information to figure out exactly what you were getting yourself in for. Okay, I am ready to be civil now. Let's zoom out and break down this entire introductory page, where we are given 3 really important pieces of information. 1, this is in the voice of someone whose relationship to 2 other characters is that they are dad and mom. 2, something happened to mom. 2a, the something that happened to mom is that she disappeared into thin air 2 days before Christmas. 3, the character who's speaking here intends to try to figure out what happened to mom. I'm being extremely literal here because I think it's important as a demonstration to separate what we're told from what we're inferring, even the stuff that's so easy to infer that we don't notice ourselves doing it. So obviously the fact that this paragraph refers to dad and to mom disappearing means that this is B we're hearing here, talking about Bernadette. We know this because we know who the characters of the story are, if nothing else because I have told you. But imagine a person who is opening this book sight unseen, has heard nothing about the plot, hasn't even read the summary on the back or the inside flap. They don't know who Bernadette or B are yet, but there's enough information here that when, on the next page, they see a stellar report card for B branch, followed by another section narrated by B where she talks to her parents about having gotten perfect grades, they're very well set up to put it together that the introduction and the section they're reading now are both from the perspective of the same B who got the report card. And then when they go on to read an email from Bernadette Fox to Manjula freaking out about the trip to Antarctica she has to plan because her daughter got perfect grades, they're probably gonna go, oh, cool, Bernadette, like the title of the book, is B's mom. And because it's only been like 2 pages and they've read the title of the book, they're almost certainly also going to put together that Bernadette is going to disappear into thin air 2 days before Christmas. And because the documents contained in the book are meticulously date-stamped, they are most likely going to recognize further that they're looking at a ticking clock counting down to Bernadette's disappearance. So while the events of the next 214 pages are largely family and neighborhood drama with a lightly satirical adult contemporary lit ficky tone, that driving force is still there. Bernadette is going to disappear into thin air 2 days before Christmas, and we are watching the days leading up to that. And if we are so inclined, we can search for clues about what exactly is going to happen and why. There's one other thing you can infer from this introduction, which is that the book we're reading is being written and collected by B in an attempt to figure out what happened to Bernadette. When she says, "It doesn't mean I can't try," she means she's going to start trying on the next page. I set this information apart because it requires the biggest leap, but that's okay because I think it's also by far the least important piece. Cards on the table, I didn't pick up on that right out of the gate, but that didn't make anything about the book or its structure difficult to understand, I don't think. I just kind of processed it as like, cool, epistolary novel interspersed with some sections narrated by B in first person. Sounds like a book. I've read a book before. So then after Bernadette's disappearance, when there are mentions of Audrey sending a bunch of documents to B and B compiling something she calls a book tying them together, chapter, I was like, oh, okay, cool. So that's the book I'm reading. And if you still missed that part, B flat out says, I wrote a book and this is that book right at the end. I don't think it really makes a huge difference whether you spend the whole book knowing that or if you don't quite put it together until it becomes more explicit later on. The act of B trying to figure out what happened to Bernadette is very explicitly in the text, whether or not you're following the metastructural component of it. So I think this is sort of a cool element where different readers are going to have different but equally valid experiences. Right, so as a refresher, we've got 3 important discoveries from the introduction of the book. B is Bernadette's daughter, or at least it's going to be really easy to recognize that shortly. Bernadette is going to go missing, and B is going to try to find her. So, here's the first scene of the movie.
Have you ever heard that the brain is like a discounting mechanism?
Okay, we're starting off somewhere completely different. That's not necessarily bad, just different.
Say someone gives you a present and it's a diamond necklace and you open it and you love it. A year later you see the necklace and you think, oh, that old thing.
I know this might seem entirely irrelevant coming from the intro section we just looked at, but this is an idea that comes up in the book as well. It's Elgin saying it to B in a pretty different context, all things considered, but you know, it works, sure.
You know why your brain discounts things? It's for survival. I think that's what happened to my mom.
Cool, here we go. Mom. The voice we're hearing is someone who has a mom, and since we're adding film language, including that the speaking voice sounds like someone relatively young, we can gather that this woman in the sea kayak is probably Mom. So there's our first point covered.
She got so focused on picking up danger signals that her discounting mechanism forgot to see all the good stuff in our life.
Ooh, alright, extra info.
And maybe Dad had quit seeing the diamond necklace side of Mom.
Mom is dissatisfied with life. Dad is dissatisfied with Mom. Let's keep going. Wait, that's it?
Do you have any idea how strong I'm being?
Yeah, that's it. That's the whole introduction. Then we roll right into the scene of B asking Bernadette and Elgin if they can go on the family trip to Antarctica. What? Okay, so if you are someone who's already basically familiar with this story, if you've read the book or read a summary of the book or seen the trailer for the movie or by any other means you have arrived in front of this movie knowing it's about a woman who goes missing, then yeah, you will probably combine what happened to Mom with the woman in the kayak and put together that Mom is missing and the place she went was into a sea kayak, and you will probably also gather that Mom forgot to see the good stuff in our life and Dad quit seeing the diamond necklace side of Mom is like the proposed reason for why she's missing in a sea kayak. But this leaves us with 2 significant issues. Number 1, remember our standard of someone who came into this story sight unseen. Imagine a viewer who has not seen the trailer, has not read the book, all they know is like, I don't know, Cate Blanchett is in it and they're a fan, or Richard Linklater directed it and they're a fan, or it's based on a book they heard somebody's book club enjoyed, or their friend invited them and their friend usually has good taste. Maybe they will put together that the movie is called Where'd You Go, Bernadette, and Cate Blanchett is famous enough that she's probably Bernadette, so in addition to being Mom, she's probably also gone somewhere. And that's what this voice means when it says, what happened to my mom. But honestly, I think it is equally likely that they'll hear the following sentences not as an explanation for why what happened to my mom, but as what happened to my mom in and of itself. She grew dissatisfied with her life, and her husband grew dissatisfied with her. A much more mundane thing to happen to a person, but a perfectly solid topic for a family dramedy. Formally speaking, I would put this initial reveal of Bernadette's disappearance much more in a category with the book's reveal of B being the one who is gathering/writing the book. I don't think everyone is going to come out of this first scene of this movie knowing that Bernadette is going to go missing. But unlike B's relation to the metastructure of the novel, Bernadette's disappearance is the whole fucking story. Narratively speaking, I would say, if you can imagine a reasonable viewer who doesn't know Bernadette is going to disappear until she disappears, you are failing at your job. The quirky family and neighborhood drama needs that undertone of suspense for this story to be this story. Not to mention, this doesn't even read like a subtle reveal that's a little overly trusting of the viewer to pick up on overly critical information. It reads like it assumes you did your homework by knowing the premise of the movie already, which makes it bad. Number 2, why in the ever-loving fuck are we revealing that Bernadette is sea kayaking in the Antarctic in the opening scene of the movie? Our hypothetical viewer who has not picked up that Bernadette is gonna go missing is gonna figure she's just overcoming her debilitating discounting mechanism whilst out sea kayaking, and that's gonna get reinforced in the next scene when we find out that the family is planning a trip to Antarctica. Self-discovery vacation, that's a tried and true family dramedy formula. This is gonna emphasize minimize that viewer's lack of suspense and turn the first 2 acts of the movie into even more like, okay, when are they gonna just fucking go to Antarctica already? But let's draw up another hypothetical viewer here. One who, through whatever means, does know that this is a movie about Bernadette going missing, but hasn't, like, read the whole book, so they don't know where she goes, Bernadette. That viewer is going to look at this introductory scene and be like, oh, she disappears to go find herself in a sea kayak. And then in the next scene, that viewer is going to hear that the family is planning a trip to Antarctica and be like, oh, okay, so she went to Antarctica. Suspense. Poof! And even for a hypothetical viewer who does not make that connection, the suspense is still deflated the second it's introduced, because in the movie, immediately after Elgin opens the door to the bathroom to find Bernadette gone, literally the next shot is Bernadette at Audrey's front door. Why? Okay, so for those who haven't read the book, after Bernadette disappears from a locked room on page 214, we do not see her again until page 306, over a month of book time later. There's been a thorough investigation, and the authorities have figured out and communicated to Elgin that Bernadette went on the Antarctic cruise and disappeared somewhere along the course of it. Per the ship's records, she wasn't left behind at a port. She got back on the boat every time she left, but simply wasn't there to debark when it returned. And combining that with the picture of her mental health painted by Elgin's efforts to have her institutionalized before her disappearance, and Bernadette's significant onboard bar tab, particularly on the last night there's any record of her, Occam's razor sure does seem to point toward a woman overboard more or less of her own volition, and Elgin basically believes this version of events. Bea pretends to be convinced and talks her dad into taking a cruise along the same route about a month after Bernadette's as a grieving ritual, but secretly she's constructed her own narrative that involves Bernadette having slipped off the boat at some point and still being alive and well in Antarctica somewhere, and she's determined to find her. The thing is, this is a wild leap on Bea's part, and it really looks like 14-year-old wishful thinking.
The wind blew so hard it froze the inside of my eyes. The tops of my cheeks felt like they might crack.
How did Bernadette keep alive for 5 weeks in this? Look around. Feel the air. We're not even in Antarctica yet.
I put my hands inside my cuffs and made fists with my numb fingers. Dad was right. He's smarter than me, and he was right. I would never find Mom. It really is just the 2 of you?
And the cruise ship passengers like you who come visit.
So nobody has, like, gotten off of one of the ships to live with you? The sound of the words coming out of my mouth, the whole idea that Mom would be here waiting for me, struck me as so babyish all of a sudden that I burst into the most babyish tears. Swirled into my humiliation was anger at myself for letting my hope gallop off so stupidly.
So when the evidence starts to come together that there is an actual practical way that she could be there, it's genuinely so exciting. Bea and Elgin retrace those theoretical steps, and whoa, there she is! And then we finally get Bernadette's side of the story in a letter she wrote to Bea explaining the whole situation, and basically asking for her blessing to stay and design the South Pole Research Facility, which, through a series of miscommunications, was delivered to the wrong address for Bea to receive it in a timely manner. It's a very effective act of the story. I found it impossible to put down. So of course the movie completely bungles all of it. So we've already revealed that Bernadette has met up with Audrey after disappearing from the bathroom. The next day, Audrey goes running after Bea in a frenzy, and for a minute I go, oh, okay, we're getting this back on the rails. Bernadette went to Audrey's house, but then she disappeared from Audrey's house. No!
I drove her to the airport last night. She said she thought you were on the same flight to Antarctica.
I cannot emphasize this enough. Bea and Elgin know exactly where Bernadette is. Immediately! So they go on the trip on another boat that leaves like a day later but stops at one port at the same time as the boat they already know Bernadette is on. There's this half-assed attempt to build some suspense where the ship's captain won't tell Elgin whether Bernadette is on the boat Elgin already knows Bernadette is on.
I can't release any information on passenger lists.
Dad, it's fine. It'll be fine.
And when Bea debarks at the port where they were supposed to meet up with Bernadette, the passengers from Bernadette's boat have already gotten back on Bernadette's boat.
Where are the passengers from the Allegra? The other cruise ship passengers already left.
Dear God, what's wrong with her?
But this is literally only suspenseful if you've come into the movie having, like, read the book and you have a vestigial sense that there are stakes to Bea physically finding Bernadette. If you don't have that context, the stakes here are just whether Bea and Elgin will meet up with Bernadette in Antarctica and finish off their vacation together, or whether they'll just see her when they all get back home, because they already know she went on the cruise. There is a very short period during which Bernadette Fox is an actual missing person. The captain, who couldn't tell Elgin before that Bernadette was on the other boat, finally tells him that she was on the other boat because he needs to notify him as her next of kin that she's no longer on the other boat. So for about 8 screen minutes, Bea and Elgin actually do not know where Bernadette is or if she's even alive. Well, I say 8 minutes, but it's actually more like 2, because while they're trying to figure out what might have happened, we see exactly what fucking happened. The film alternates between scenes of Bea and Elgin and scenes of Bernadette, who, by the way, we have already watched sneak off the boat to try to shoot her shot at getting somebody to let her design the South Pole research base she's heard needs a new architect. That happens before the conversation between Elgin and the captain, so we know precisely where Bernadette is at all times. There is theoretically suspense for the characters, but there is no suspense whatsoever for the audience, which when done well and on purpose you'd call dramatic irony. And that is the first time anyone has ever mentioned dramatic irony in a description of the plot of the 2019 film Where'd You Go, Bernadette? That's a clever reference to the book. I am calling this movie the Seattle of movies, and that is overly mean to Seattle. It is a major, major upheaval to not only the basic structure of the story, but to the entire fucking thing that this story is doing to collapse the timeline like this so that Bea and Elgin figure out that Bernadette took the Antarctica trip basically immediately. And much more importantly, to show us Bernadette's side of the story at the same time. Bea and Elgin aren't totally sure that they'll find her, but we know that they will, because we're bouncing between status updates on both of them simultaneously. We literally never get a chance to wonder, where'd you go, Bernadette? We know exactly where she went! And insult to injury, the exact text from the introductory paragraph of the book shows up in the movie after Bernadette has disappeared out of the window, and after we've already seen her meet up with Audrey.
Mom disappears into thin air right before Christmas.
You know that Alfred Hitchcock clip every video essayist is legally obligated to reference at some point?
Tell the audience there is a bomb under that table, and will go off in 5 minutes. But the whole emotion of the audience is totally different.
Maria Semple told us there was a bomb under the table, and Richard Linklater apparently looked at that and was like, why would you tell them about the bomb? The bomb's not gonna go off for another 5 minutes. It's just illogical to put the explanation about the bomb so far before the bomb goes off. Don't you know how time works? The part where the bomb's actually going to get diffused before it goes off, though, that part we need to tell them immediately after telling them about the bomb. People might worry about the bomb going off. Who are you? You've made good movies! What happened to you, Richard? Part 8. Comedy. Before writing Where'd You Go, Bernadette, Maria Semple was a consulting producer on Arrested Development, and it shows. This book is as dark as it is dry, as it is laugh out loud. It makes you cringe and roll on the floor, and it is so fucking funny. But I suppose if you're boring, you could decide that doesn't fucking matter. In a section of the book called Bernadette of the Past and Present, we read a 14-page email from Bernadette to her former collaborator Paul Jelinek detailing everything she has been up to since the two were last working together 20 years prior. Pinballing from her quippy grievances about the civil engineering of the city of Seattle, to her obvious symptoms of severe clinical depression, to complaints about the politically correct culture of Seattle, to the history of her feud with Audrey, to a screed against the unhoused population of Seattle, to her grief and trauma related to a series of miscarriages, only for the viable pregnancy to result in a child who barely managed to survive her first 24 hours of life and eventually grew up to be Bea, and back to complaints about the weather in Seattle, beneath all of which is precisely the kind of undercurrent an old friend and collaborator can instantly sniff out.
Bernadette, are you done? You can't honestly believe any of this nonsense. People like you must create. If you don't create, Bernadette, you will become a menace to society. Paul.
Flawless fucking comedic timing. Put it in the MoMA. Okay, but if you're going to put this into a movie, a series of issues present themselves. Immediately, you simply cannot put a 14-page email on screen. You just can't. By and large, the movie handles the vast swaths of the book that take place in Bernadette's outbox by having her dictate them to a speech-to-text program, which is generally effective and a stellar use of Cate Blanchett. But that is not gonna fly for, I say again, 14 pages. So there's a pretty intuitive adaptational choice here, which is to have this scene take place in person over coffee instead. This is a great practical fix, but it kills the comedy of manners dead. 14 pages of trauma dumping in the business inbox of a colleague you haven't spoken to in 20 years is a major faux pas. 14 pages of telling a colleague you haven't spoken to in 20 years but has already opted into a coffee date where you tell them about the last 20 years of your life, about all the traumatic stuff that happened over the last 20 years alongside all the petty grievances, is some pretty darn socially acceptable, dare I say, normal behavior. The rhythm where one person monologues while the second simply makes all the right faces and noises for a time is essentially the rhythm of catching up with a person you haven't seen in a long time. The change in venue completely undercuts the comedy. This is not, however, an insurmountable obstacle. The change in medium also grants access to a whole array of other tools that could drive home a similar beat. Shot composition, vocal delivery, scoring, editing choices about whose face to show doing what at which points of the story. Cate Blanchett's delivery of some of the sections lifted more or less word for word from the book is fucking stunning. She knows what book she's signed on to adapt.
There go the dishes, there goes the grocery store, there goes exercise, there goes basic human kindness.
I even like that there are sections where she gets so far ahead of herself that her breaths come in really weird places.
They were ever laid out this place. I mean, they never met a two-way street. They didn't suddenly, and for no reason, want to turn into a one-way street.
Normally I'd call that an element of a somewhat stilted performance, an actor who has learned their lines word perfect but hasn't quite figured out how to say them like their organic thoughts, but I actually really like that for Bernadette Fox in this moment. It creates this impression that she has scripted this out in her head, and she's just been waiting for someone to ask her to mount the performance. Like, it's all been bottled up, and it's finally bursting out, like she's a 50-year-old bottle of champagne that just got whacked with the false edge of a saber right where the seam meets the lip, which is exactly correct. 14 pages. But while Cate Blanchett may get the joke, Richard Linklater sure the fuck does not. Not only is this scene a perfect example of how simply lifting the text of a novel and placing it on the screen rarely makes for a functional recreation of what was actually happening on the page, there are also a number of deliberate changes made that reinforce that disconnect. In the film, this scene cuts back and forth between Bernadette's coffee with Paul Jelinek and Elgin's meeting with the psychiatrist who eventually runs Bernadette's intervention. Now, there is a sum of the parts thing to this choice that is at least theoretically interesting. Having both characters recount the last 20 years to separate audiences draws out the comparisons and contrasts between their experiences of the same events and highlights the conflict in their marriage, which isn't nearly as front of mind in this part of the book. This aligns well with the focus established in the changed introduction of the film, the quiet drama of a long-term relationship gone stale.
Maybe Dad had quit seeing the diamond necklace side of Mom.
Giving Paul a few lines of comforting dialogue to break up Bernadette's monologue also works toward this more earnest take on the scene.
Oh my God. I am so sorry.
No.
I just didn't know.
So far I would call this an artistic choice. An artistic choice I dislike because I enjoy laughter, but an entirely competent one. Richard Linklater's not interested in the comedic edge of this interaction. He just wants to make a heartwarming, life-affirming family drama, I would say to myself at this point. I am allowed to hate it, but he is allowed to make it. So why does the scene end with the same words Paul Jelinek writes back in the book?
You done?
This simply does not make sense here. This is no longer a tone-deaf yet revealing screed on Bernadette's part. It is a deep and heartfelt exploration of the sound her heart is making via a conversation this man has been actively present on the other side of.
I am so sorry.
No.
I just didn't know.
This version of this interaction cannot sensically end with Paul's dismissal of the whole thing, so he has to walk it back with about twice as many words as his actual point requires.
You done?
You can't honestly believe any of this nonsense.
As amusing as it is, it obscures the larger point.
People like you must create.
That's what you were brought into this world to do, Bernadette.
If you don't create, Bernadette, you will become a menace to society.
I think there's one very simple answer to all of your problems. Get your ass back to work and create something.
The menace to society line is iconic. Of course you want to include it. But including it in this version of the scene takes this from an adaptational choice I dislike but respect to a willful not getting of the joke. Which then rolls on into the intervention scene, which in the movie is an incredibly dramatic and entirely earnest portrayal of a man relaying his very real concerns for his wife with the help of a psychiatrist who is prepared to provide the help she needs.
Bernadette, I'm worried that you are suffering from adjustment disorder. I'd like Elgin to begin by expressing his love.
Hey, of course I love you. I don't know who you are right now.
You're right. I need help.
Bernadette, I'd like to suggest that while Elgin and Bea are on their trip, that you and I work together for a few weeks at Madrona Hill.
The loony bin?
This scene in the book, believe it or not, is one of the funniest fucking things I have ever read.
Please proceed, Captain Kurtz. Sorry, Dr. Kurtz.
Bernadette, your aggression toward your neighbor led to the destruction of her home and possible PTSD of 30 children. You have no intention of going to Antarctica. You planned on getting 4 wisdom teeth removed to prevent it. You willingly turned over personal information to a criminal which could have led to financial ruin. You are incapable of even the most basic human interaction, relying on an internet assistant to buy groceries, schedule appointments, and conduct all basic household duties. Your home is worthy of condemnation by the building department, which indicates to me serious depression.
Are you still presenting reality to me, or can I say something?
Get it.
We turn to see a man in a long coat staring at his phone.
Who are you?
Detective Driscoll, Seattle PD.
He's been there the whole time. I passed him on my way in.
Sorry, I got a little excited. Clemson picked off a pass and ran it in. Pretend I'm not here.
Bernadette, Elgin would like to begin by expressing his love for you. Elgin?
What the hell is wrong with you, Bernadette? I thought you were even more upset than I was about those miscarriages, but really, the whole time, all you cared about was some stupid house. What you went through with the 20-mile house, I go through shit like that 10 times a day at Microsoft. People get over things. It's called bouncing back. You won a MacArthur grant. 20 years later, you're still nursing the injustice of a fight you had with some English asshole? A fight you brought upon yourself? Do you realize how selfish and self-pitying that is? Do you?
Okay, so it's important to acknowledge there's a lot of hurt, but let's stay in the here and now. Elgin, why don't you try expressing your love for Bernadette? You had mentioned what a wonderful mother.
And you're back there in your Airstream, lying to me left and right, outsourcing your life, our lives, to India? Don't I get a vote in that? You're afraid of getting seasick when we're crossing the Drake Passage. There's a way to deal with it. It's called a scopolamine patch. You don't arrange to get 4 wisdom teeth removed and lie to me and Bea about it. People die getting their wisdom teeth pulled. But you'll do it just to avoid small talk with strangers? What the hell is Bea gonna think when she hears about this? And all because you're a failure? How about a wife? How about a mother? What happened to coming to your husband? Why do you have to spill your guts out to some architect you haven't seen for 20 years? God, you're sick. You make me sick and you're sick.
Another example of love is a hug.
You've gone insane, Bernadette.
How about we put a pin in love and let's move on to the damage that Bernadette's behavior has caused.
Are you joking? The damage she's caused?
I know the damage.
Great. Next is, I forgot what's next. We covered reality, love, damage.
Don't look at me.
Let me check my notes.
Is this a good time to ask? Is this anyone's coffee? I put mine down somewhere.
This scene literally made me laugh out loud in public, and it simply breaks my heart to see it done so dirty like this.
I'd like Elgin to begin by expressing his love.
Hey, of course I love you.
But as you may be starting to get a feel, comedy is not my only grievance against the tweeification of the intervention and Elgin's presence in the Paul Jelinek scene. So in case that thread isn't quite clear yet, here's one last clue.
You tried to run over a mother at school.
Don't be ludicrous. Oh, shut up. What the hell are you doing here anyway? Will someone open a window and let the gnat out?
Stop calling her that, Bernadette.
Forgive me. Could someone get the admin out of my living room?
Miss Lisa Gall, it would be a good idea for you to leave.
She can stay.
Really? She can stay? How's that?
She's a friend.
What kind of friend? She's not a friend of this marriage, I'll guarantee you that.
You're not in charge now, Bernadette.
Wait a second. What is that?
What?
Sticking out of the bottom of your pants.
Me? Where?
It's a pair of underwear. You've got panties sticking out of your jeans.
Oh, I have no idea how they got there.
You're a Seattle board secretary and you have no place in this house.
I feel like when women say men are the worst, what we mean is something akin to I or someone I love am experiencing a deep personal wound that is not only extremely painful, but also frustratingly familiar, both to my own experience and the experiences of many other women who I care about, in a way that rises to the level of the systemic. Because While, of course, many individual men do experience deep personal wounds similar to this one, and of course many individual men would never act in such a way as to cause this kind of grievous personal wound to another person, men as a category are permitted to inflict, indeed in many ways encouraged to inflict, and above all, excused from inflicting this kind of personal wound against women in a way that simply does not exist in the reverse, and that actually is fundamentally unjust. And I think we all kind of know that it's not really fair to expect someone who is nursing their own or a loved one's deep personal wound to say all of that when men are the worst is right there. And so there's some kind of like willful ignorance and almost weaponized incompetence to this dance we all have to do, where we pretend that a woman saying men are the worst is being a misandrist. Anyway, in the book, Elgin cheats on his wife with his admin, gets her pregnant, and actively seeks to have Bernadette put on an involuntary psychiatric hold because she's embarrassing him, and he's able to get a doctor on board with that despite it being wildly unethical, basically because he's the guy who gave that one TED Talk. Really puts things into perspective, huh? Well, Bernadette's no angel, it's true. As tends to happen with screen adaptations of novels about messy people, our protagonist is also rather messier in the book than she is in the movie. Her casual racism against her ultimately fake Indian assistant is much less, quirky than as played off by Cate Blanchett.
I need you to work your Hindu magic on a huge project.
Her significant bigotry against the unhoused population of Seattle has been cut from the film entirely, and so has the part where she calls her husband's mistress a Seattle-born secretary, which is frankly tragic. While we're at it, Bernadette's nemesis Audrey is also a much tangibly worse person in the novel. In both versions of the story, we see Audrey pointedly lie that Bernadette ran over her foot with her car, but only in the book do we see the itemized list of emergency room charges Audrey insists Bernadette pay alongside notes from her care team stating she was uninjured and all procedures were elective and done only because she demanded them. In both versions of the story, we see Audrey trespass on the Fox Branch property with the complaint that Bernadette's blackberry brambles make Audrey's house look bad, and a contractor she demands Bernadette pay to remove them, but only in the book do we see the notes between Audrey and the contractor where Audrey threatens not to pay him for his work on her own property, and insists that he complete Bernadette's on an unreasonable timeline in secret instead of just getting Bernadette's permission. In both versions of the story, we see this hastiness on Audrey's part result in a mudslide that causes significant damage to her house during a school fundraising event. In both versions of the story, we see Bernadette cop to having pretty much known that would happen and rolled with it to let Audrey get hoisted by her own petard.
I had those blackberries removed in accordance with the specifications of Bugs Meany herself.
And in both versions of the story, a comically large and vaguely threatening sign Bernadette has put up on her property in a moment of spite following the trespassing incident gets coincidentally swept up in the mudslide to land directly on Audrey's window, but only in the book does Audrey get thrown out of the hotel where she's staying during the repairs to her house and have charges pressed against her for verbally and physically assaulting an employee who responds to her complaints about noise and pot smoke by correctly going after their source in her son's room. And then she proceeds to invite herself to stay at her friend Sue Lynn's house, who, did invite her, but also they've been fighting since then, so Audrey just lets herself in with a spare key and pretends like everything's fine.
Hey you! I got gingerbread houses to decorate after school. When will you be home? I want to know when to pop the roast in the oven.
As I said, I'm super busy at work, so I won't be back for dinner, but my mouth is watering just thinking about your famous roast.
Don't think I can't take a hint. How about I get in my car and I deliver you a plate myself?
How about you don't? Thanks, though. Okay, but Audrey's also a better person in the book in the sense that she hears about the case Elgin is building, that Bernadette is a danger to herself and others, and specifically the role that her own accusations play in the case, and it causes her to have a literal come-to-Jesus moment and rescue Bernadette from the intervention, which is how she gets out without anyone else noticing. Audrey sets up a ladder to the bathroom window, which the two of them run off with and hide at Audrey's house. So that's actually also a point against book Bernadette, that she doesn't come around on Audrey until Audrey proactively does something for her. Right, so this is all largely about the comedy of manners element being pretty much cut from the film, right? We're bringing everyone back down to quirky but mostly believable human behavior. for some reason, even though we've got Kristen fucking Wiig at our disposal. So is there an extent to which Elgin is just being de-broadened along with everyone else? Yes, absolutely. There's a bit of sanding down of the edges needed to take any of these characters from Arrested Development caricature to heartwarming morality player. But consider, the Bernadette of the book is a casual bigot who refuses to participate in her community due to her superiority complex and hair-trigger spite that are kicked up to 11 by having shoved her creative spirit into a chest in the attic somewhere 20-odd years ago, but ultimately loves the shit out of her family. And the Bernadette of the movie is a manic pixie dream mom who has been rejected by a community who see her as an outsider and has never quite bothered to notice how sad that makes her. The Audrey of the book is a nuclear weapons grade busybody with a log in her own eye that she has to hit rock bottom before she can consider removing, and the Audrey of the movie is a garden variety busybody in need of a light poke to reestablish contact with her better angels. The Elgin of the book is a control freak who is so absent from his own family and so lauded in his work that he needs only the slightest provocation to believe his wife is a lost cause, and her life and his daughter's life can be browbeaten into submission the same way the software he programs can, without a second's regard for his own role in any piece of this mess, and needs a tectonic fucking event in his personal life to wake him up to what an absolute asshole he's become, at which point he does finally make some changes. And the Elgin of the movie is a guy with a cool job that sometimes means he's not home for dinner, who's past the honeymoon stage of his marriage, but still cares tremendously about his wife's mental health crisis that a professional immediately agrees exists and is very serious. We see how that's different, right? We see how maybe this whole thing smacks of gender? Ah! Part 9, the video essay. There is a video essay in this movie. Video essays. I make those.
I was literally just watching that video essay on you 2 nights ago.
This I love. I love the idea of seeing my niche-y little world represented for general audiences. Let's see what we look like from the outside. Fuck yeah. It's also, like, indubitably correct. If Bernadette Fox were a real person, there absolutely would be at least one video essay about her. Absolute rock star who was spearheading green architecture before there was a word for it, built 2 historically cool buildings, and then dropped off the face of the earth. Somebody has told all 2.5+ hours of that story, and you can 100% watch it on Nebula. But aside from being just fun for me personally, the presence of this Bernadette Fox video essay is an intuitive and very smart choice in the move to film. The story of Bernadette's architecture career comes in the book in an art forum article formatted like an oral history, mostly told in large chunks of direct quotes from Bernadette's former colleagues. So why not just make that interview footage? Duh, it's easy. And in the context of Bernadette's place in architectural history, that she's extremely well known to a certain subset of architects, but entirely forgotten by basically everyone else, a video essay holds the correct cultural spot, as opposed to like a fully produced documentary. Video essays are perfect for niche-ass topics that you never would have known to seek out on your own, but will devour given the right packaging to notice how interesting they are. One person with passion, knowledge, and some combination of time, talent, disposable income, and a pre-existing platform is all it takes. Video essays are also an actual art form, with immediately recognizable genre conventions born of both practical limitations and community creativity. So, let's see how this one stacks up. All right, so boring stuff first. Let's take a look at the title and thumbnail. There's basically one frame where we can see that this video is called 20 by 20, the 20-mile house 20 years later. And the thumbnail is this like architectural sketch of Bernadette's project, the 20-mile house, meaning it's a house made from materials that were all sourced from within 20 miles of the building site. This is a reasonably eye-catching piece of art. You could totally make a good thumbnail using this image, but it's just got the title of the video written in the middle of it, which is big wasted real estate. Conventional wisdom, text in the thumbnail is like a second chance to catch your potential audience's attention, so if you're just repeating the same text you used in the title of the video, then you're squandering that opportunity. At least the text is in the middle, so it's not going to be blocked by the runtime in any view. A lot of people like to put text in the bottom of the thumbnail, and then you get this little box covering it up, so at least this is legible. This title is also kind of long. Oh, interesting. I was sure that was going to truncate pretty badly, but it's actually okay, except in the mobile column view. That's not awful. Side note, if you happen to be a YouTuber, thumbsup.tv is where I'm testing this. It's really helpful. So overall, this is a pretty meh title thumbnail combo. I think it's probably pretty decent for viewers who are already familiar with the 20 Mile House, but it's not going to bring in much in terms of like new audience. This title is actually pulled from the book, but it's the name of a contest for people to design a new version of Bernadette's 20 Mile House, not the title of the article that's being adapted into video here. That title is Saint Bernadette, the most influential architect you've never heard of, which is, I mean, that's the way to go, baby. Move Saint Bernadette into the thumbnail text, maybe pull like that photo of her at the drafting table and like scratch out her eyes or something to make it look like she's being like erased from history. Yeah, that's the way I'd go. I actually think that looks pretty fucking good. Hire me, Richard. So this is not stellar packaging, but that's not necessarily bad for the movie because this isn't supposed to have like gone viral or anything. So it's totally consistent with the story if we're saying that the audience is like pretty niche. So we can see here that this video has gotten 7,694 views and it was published on November 4th, 2018. I think we're going with this being December 2018 currently, so the video's around a month old in universe. So I think this all totally tracks as like an established but not especially popular YouTuber. Like someone who's built up a small audience but hasn't quite cracked the algorithm yet, or even like someone who has cracked the algorithm previously but they don't really like understand why enough to repeat it. I'm talking about this like hitting the algorithm as a sure thing at some point. It's never a sure thing, but you do this long enough, you talk to enough other people who do this stuff and have found some success, you do eventually pick up some skills. You learn how to at least like improve your odds pretty well, even though it is still kind of a complete gamble every time. It is curious to me that this video has apparently managed to rack up 317,000 likes and 25,000 dislikes. Remember, this is 2018, so you could still see dislikes. And more than twice the number of people who watched the video disliked it. Interesting. I would also advise this Luke Roldan person to get a real channel icon and also probably a more ambiguous channel name if they're going to keep putting out stuff with a female sounding presenter on voiceover, which we're going to hear when we watch the video in a second. YouTube is personality driven enough that people are going to be a little put off if the name doesn't seem to match the voice. Unless, you know, I mean, maybe this person's transitioning. Frankly, that would also 100% track for a video essayist, in which case, go with God. Just get a channel icon still. It's also interesting looking at this sidebar. Bernadette Fox is apparently a super popular subject for YouTube videos. These are all doing numbers. You know, I think this mostly works as implying like archival footage, which totally makes sense that it would exist, totally makes sense that it would be uploaded to YouTube. I even buy that it would be recommended on a more general audience video on the same topic. But like here we've got this video called Details of Bieber with this ambiguous green blob for a thumbnail sitting at 150,000 views. I mean, clearly it's time for me to pivot. Okay, let's move on to the voiceover.
The Architects and Builders Association of America recently polled 300 architectural graduate students and asked them which architects they admire most.
This sounds like a professional voice actor to me. So like the basics of the delivery are not entirely wrong. Like they're definitely doing this weird emphasis in the cadence that does feel very in line with like stuff that will drive me absolutely batty about especially like new video essayists.
Her first job was typical grunt work, laying out bathrooms in the executive wing.
But the vocal tone sounds like someone who's like knows how to use their voice as an instrument and is super comfortable talking into a high quality microphone, which makes it sound like someone who was hired for this job more so than like a person with a passion working out of their bedroom, which like exists, obviously. It's just, it makes me think of like a legacy media outlet that has like a presence on YouTube, like a Vox or a PBS Digital Studios or something, which just doesn't really line up with the packaging or the view count. I also for sure would have edited out the breaths, and I think the pace is just like way too leisurely.
Tucked amongst the Frank Lloyd Wrights, Mies van der Rohes, Frank Gehry's, and Lorenzo Piano's is a woman who is virtually unknown.
By 2018, we were kind of starting to move away from that like rapid fire, like crash course type of delivery that like, I mean, it was born of necessity, right? There used to be like a limit on how long of a video you could upload to YouTube. And so you had to talk really fast to make sure you could fit everything in. I don't think there were limits anymore by 2018. Like if there were, it was long enough that it wasn't really like a main practical concern, but it was just like, we were used to hearing it. So it just sort of stuck around as like, it became a genre convention. I remember having kind of a hard time getting into folding ideas in like 2017, 2018, because the way that he talked felt just like unbearably slow compared to what I was used to. And I think I would have felt the same way about this. And like same thing with this music, right?
An icon was born.
guess what struck us about Bernadette was the joy that she took in tasks that other students would find beneath them.
Fox was the most junior member of a group assigned to the Team Disney building in Burbank.
Yeah, like that pause. That pause is way too long. I want to get into this timeline and clean it up. I want to fix it so bad. And this like corporate training video motivational music. It's so gross. I hate it so much. People don't use that shit for video essays. Lo-fi chill hop is right there. I think maybe the days of that being the complete punchline were like kind of behind us by late 2018, but like, how do you know the term video essay in 2018, but not know that the score you need is lo-fi chill hop? Come on! Alright, so let's talk about the visuals. So like this Ken Burnsy effect with the photos is good, obviously, that's right. This like archival news stuff, that's great. But then there's just so much of this interview footage that like, it looks really, really good, but it's completely wrong. So like, in universe, this has to be original, right? Like, internet personality Luke Roldan has to have gone and interviewed these people. Because if this isn't supposed to be original footage, then, like, somebody has already made, like, a well-funded documentary about Bernadette Fox that Luke Roldan is just plagiarizing. Which, I mean, like, obviously we know that's plausible. Call H. Bomber guy. But then why are we doing this as a video essay in the first place? Why aren't we just watching the documentary? Well, because if it's a documentary, then Bernadette would have known about it. And even if it's, like, a garbage Netflix documentary, then, like, it would make her a lot bigger deal to a lot more lay people than just, you know, this video essay with amateurish packaging that's not hitting in the algorithm. And now we're in a completely different version of the story. So this has to be original footage. But like, Luke Roldan doesn't even have the business acumen to upload a channel icon. Where in the hell did they get all like the money and the pull to get all of this gorgeous 4K, like perfectly lit, multi-camera 4K interview footage? Like, this is the art form of the video essay, of like what people who watch video essays think of as video essays, is a lot of found footage. And some original footage maybe, but it's scrappy as hell. Like, if it's not at least a little rough around the edges, who are you and how did you get here? Like, you can graduate to filming stuff that looks like this. Obviously, you know, Patrick's done it. Abby's done it. Plenty of people have done it. But they weren't doing it at the point when they were pulling in 7,000 views in a month, right? You look like a plant if you can somehow pull this off at 7,000 views in a month. And you know, like, obviously I know that this is this way because it's a movie, and for most of the audience it wouldn't really be fun to watch that much of the movie in the form of like pixelated screen recordings of Zoom calls. And it is probably actually easier for like a real professional film crew to just sit a famous actor down in a chair in front of an interesting backdrop and light them well and hit them with a good camera. But I would have loved to see this done as pixelated screen recordings of Zoom calls, and I don't think I'm the only one. I think that this could have been hands down the best part of the movie if Richard had simply committed to the damn bit. But he didn't. And so frankly, I resent having my line of work dragged into this mess. This is the stupidest thing I've ever done. That's not true, but it is pretty stupid. Part 11, Fate. Here's my favorite telltale mark of an adaptation that doesn't really get what the thing it's adapting was doing or have any idea what it's doing with the thing it's adapting, is the trail of breadcrumbs you get to point to go, oh, that's in the book, except the reason it was in the book was like a real reason, and the reason it's in the movie is that it was in the book. Now, sometimes stuff in books will have explanations that you simply don't need in another medium. For example, in the film adaptation of Jurassic Park, the Jeeps have diagonal red stripes painted on the hoods. If you've read the book, you may remember that there's a quick mention that the Triceratops kept charging the Jeeps, and the diagonal red stripes put a stop to it. The scientists aren't really sure why, but it's consistently effective. That explanation is cut from the movie, because the level of pedantry you can get away with in a hard sci-fi novel, where much of the appeal is that it wears its meticulous research on its sleeve, is very different from in a blockbuster movie, where the appeal is a character-driven story with cool-looking dinosaurs. The red stripe looks neat, so there's no reason not to use the design, but it loses very little in the omission of the explanation and would gain even less by its inclusion. An example of this from Where'd You Go, Bernadette would be Elgin's patent cubes. Sue Lin explains in the book that these are a commemorative thing given to Microsoft developers anytime they patent a technology, and Elgin has so many that he's run out of places to put them, and they're just kind of tossed haphazardly around his office. Later, when Elgin's big project gets basically scrapped and he quits his job, he talks about wanting to continue to work on the humanitarian applications of the technology that motivated him, but it's complicated because Microsoft owns the patents. And B's like, wait, I thought you owned those. And Elgin's like, no, I just own the commemorative cubes. None of this backstory is included in the movie, but there is an establishing shot of all of Elgin's cubes in his office that does everything it needs to do. He's got a bunch of awards, he's a big deal, you don't really need it explained any more than that. But sometimes the explanation is kind of fucking important. Like Exhibit A, why does Bernadette wear a fishing vest? Why am I wearing a fishing vest for that matter?
Oh, yes, Manjula, one very important thing. I'd like a fishing vest.
There's a reason.
Back when I actually enjoyed leaving the house, I sat on a plane next to an environmentalist who spent his life zigzagging the globe. He had on a fishing vest, which contained his passport, money, glasses, and film canisters. Yes, film. It was that long ago. The genius part, everything's in one place. It's handy, it's zipped in, plus you can whip it off and plop it down on the x-ray belt. I always said to myself, next time I travel, I'm gonna get me one of those. My time has come. You'd better get two.
Bernadette is a Scotty vest person. She is entirely fine with sacrificing looking traditionally cool in favor of utility. But as we see once we learn about her architectural philosophy, she usually manages to make utility look incredibly cool too. Elgin sees the vest as a sign of Bernadette's mental decline.
Fishing vests, sleeping in public, antipsychotic medication, and now men following her.
But at the intervention, the psychiatrist sees a different picture.
There was nothing about her appearance that indicated she did not care for herself. Indeed, she came off as well-groomed and chic.
Admittedly, Bernadette's not wearing the vest in that scene, but the point stands that there's an underlying logic to the vest. And Elgin's jump to add it to the list of signs that she needs to be put on a psychiatric hold rather than, like, asking her what's up with it says much more about his mental state than hers. So in cutting Bernadette's explanation of why she wants the fishing vest,
one replete with the zippered pockets. And apparently, I need some blackberry bushes in my yard removed.
We are, if anything, encouraged to see it the same way Elgin does, as a bizarre and indeed perhaps clinically significant quirk. Why would she want a fishing vest? She's not going fishing. It shouldn't be this hard to make something this simple make sense. Exhibit B, Samantha 2. This is the name of the product Elgin is working on at Microsoft that's sort of a mind-reading digital assistant.
Say hello to Samantha 2.
Sounds cool, but why is it called Samantha 2? Well, in the full version of Elgin's TED Talk, as transcribed in the book, Elgin tells the story of how the original Samantha was a Jetson-style robot named after a character from Bewitched, but the project was cancelled due to the practical limitations of programming all the physical steps of every possible command. Samantha 2 leapfrogs that problem. There's some sci-fi wizardry to the idea that 2012-level robotics could literally read minds well enough to operate a whole smart home, sure, but the basic logic makes enough sense to encourage you to suspend your disbelief as long as you're not a boring person. And the description of the full TED Talk given by this Silicon Valley type who looks all messy and casual, but still ends the thing with the panache of a combination magic show and stand-up routine, you buy that this thing went viral with a certain crowd, and that's the important part. Now, would it have been cool to see the full TED Talk in the movie? Yes. Does it make sense that most of it was cut? Also yes. Its main purpose is to reinforce the mythology of Elgin Branch that's established in a number of other places and could be amplified much more efficiently in other ways through film language if Richard Linklater had wanted to, which he didn't, because the mythology of Elgin Branch is what allows him to be an asshole to his family, and we don't want any of that here because we're cowards. But the full TED Talk is also the only reason it makes sense to have the product be called Samantha 2. Samantha, sure, we do love to give a digital assistant a female name, but why 2? And frankly, if you're cutting the robot housewife origin story, she should probably have like a flashier, more futuristic sounding name anyway. Keeping the name from the book only serves to signal to people who have read the book that you have also read the book, and to save you the work of having to come up with a better one. Exhibit C, B playing Risk with the girls from Port Lockroy. This particular fumble isn't so much to do with an underlying meaning as it is its relative location in the plot. In both versions of the story, the game takes place as the boat is arriving at Palmer Station, which is where Bernadette has ended up. So B is with people who can explain what Palmer Station is and the mechanics of researchers getting back and forth between it and the cruise ship, which in the book at least plants the seeds that lead B and Elgin to figure out that the multiple pink penguin cocktails on Bernadette's bar tab weren't about solo binge drinking, but about talking over drinks with a visiting scientist. In the movie, we already fucking know that because it's bad. They do keep the explanation that this takes place in the middle of the night.
I think we're dropping
for researcher at Palmer Station.
Right now?
Yeah, the cruise companies always like to do these transfers in the middle of the night.
And I think that was a garbage decision as well, because it's shot in broad daylight, which is correct. December is Antarctic summer, and there are periods when the sun doesn't set at all, which gets mentioned in the book, but not in the movie. So unless you just know that off the top of your head, you're gonna be like, they just said it was the middle of the night. Why does it look like it's noon? Which was completely unnecessary. Just cut that line of dialogue. We don't need to know what time it is. Anyway, tabletop gaming. In the book, this game of Risk takes place at the end of the day when Bea has gone ashore at Port Lockroy, where she thought Bernadette would be, and she's finally come to terms with the fact that she's not going to find her. She's had a long emotional chat and more or less reconciled with her dad, and spent the rest of the day assisting a scientist with some research about penguins. It's not that she's not still emotional, but she's done a lot of crying already today, so it makes sense to see her in the blowing off steam playing board games until 3 a.m. stage of grief. In the movie, this still takes place the same day as that stop at Port Lockroy, and Bea is still upset not to have found Bernadette there. But remember, the film's tension of Port Lockroy is not whether Bea will find Bernadette at all. It's whether she'll meet up with her in Antarctica or whether they'll all just see each other when they get home, because they know Bernadette is on the goddamn Antarctic cruise.
I drove her to the airport last night.
Bea and Elgin have the same basic emotional chat they have in the book, but it's all wonky because the stakes are a nothing burger, and it's only after they get back on the boat that they find out that Bernadette is actually missing from the boat she's supposed to be on. So we're in a very immediate, raw stage of grief here. This is the bad news. The bad news has finally arrived. Now, right at the end of the movie. We cut to Bernadette at Palmer Station because we know she's fine, but Bea and Elgin don't know that, and yet, the very first time we see Bea after getting the news that her mother is presumed to have fallen into the Southern Ocean in a drunken stupor, she's chattily playing Risk with some new friends.
World domination ain't pretty.
What in the actual fuck? Exhibit D, the Space Needle birthday card.
While the restaurant revolves, everyone can write something on it, and when it comes back around later, you'll have a card full of birthday wishes.
In the book, this setup has a punchline. Elgin storms into this birthday dinner for Bea's friend Kennedy to yell at Bernadette about the mudslide, but the confrontation is interrupted by the return of the birthday card.
What's going on with this family? I just came here to have a conversation.
You came here to yell at Mom. Audrey Griffin yelled at her already. You weren't even there. It was horrible.
Get it, get it!
Kennedy climbed over me and grabbed her birthday card.
Oh no! I hate this thing.
She was just about to rip up her card, but I grabbed it out of her hand. Mostly the card was covered with things like Jesus is our Savior, remember our Lord Jesus died for our sins, plus passages from the Bible. I started laughing. And then Kennedy started crying. Mom snatched the card.
Don't worry, Kennedy. I'm going to go hunt down those Jesus freaks.
No, you are not.
Do it! I want to watch!
Yeah, Mom, I want to watch too.
I'm leaving. Nobody cares, nobody listens, nobody wants me here. Go ahead, embarrass yourself. Attack people who have actually found some meaning in their lives.
Mom didn't hunt down the Jesus freaks at the restaurant, but she did write, "It's a child's birthday. What the hell is wrong with you people?" and set it on the window, and as we left, it started to go around.
In the movie, none of that happens.
You came here to yell at Mom. You already did that. You were there. It was horrible. Come on.
Where are they going? And they never get the card back. Presumably it's still going around the Space Needle to this day. Exhibit E, the shuttle.
You guys want to take the shuttle? Let's take the shuttle. Yeah.
This is a bit of dialogue that's part of an extensive running thing in Sue Lynn's emails to Audrey about her new job as Elgin's admin. There's a system of shuttles and buses called the Microsoft Connector that gets employees from where they live around Seattle to the Microsoft campus, which is, for the record, a real thing. Sue Lynn's frequent mentions of it show her journey from thinking her boss is just as bad as his wife, her best friend's nemesis Bernadette, when he avoids small talk with her by wearing noise-canceling headphones that aren't plugged into anything, to getting to take a ride in the fancy shuttle that's just for VPs but is actually identical to the other shuttles, to holding a leadership role in the cult of Elgin Branch because she gets it. Elgin Branch is a celebrity. He's a genius. People literally reach out and touch him as he walks down the aisle of the connector. Of course he wears noise-canceling headphones or he'd never know a moment's peace. It's also world building that helps really hammer in how much Seattle is basically a company town, which is one of the things that makes Bernadette feel so trapped and stifled there. Naturally, this is all cut from the movie because it's part of the satire element that has been cut from the movie, and it's filtered through Sue Lynn, whose role is reduced to basically Gretchen Wieners but with less depth. I'm being mean? I've gotten too mean. Let's reel it back in. Naturally, this is all cut from the movie because things had to be cut, and the Silicon Valley satire stuff would be a reasonable choice in even a competent adaptation, especially considering the pace at which that landscape changes and could age the film by its opening weekend, and the depths of the epistolary format need rock-solid justification to be included anyway. So why mention the shuttle at all? Why do we need any discussion of the logistics of how a bunch of co-workers are getting to lunch together? Did E.L. James write this? I'm obsessed with this establishing shot of the shuttle too. We must know what the Microsoft connector looks like. This is probably the chillest offender in this section. Like, all things considered, it's not that bad. If I hadn't read the book very recently before I watched the movie, I might not have even flagged it as weird, but I think it still sticks out to me as emblematic of the problem here. It's hard to diagnose the actual thought process from without, but it almost feels like a relic of, like, if we just take enough little things that are in the book and put them in the movie, then everyone will know we read the book. Like, a faithful adaptation is just one where you can point at the screen like, I remember that. Like, Ready Player One is a faithful adaptation of the concept of the 1980s.
Remember Ghostbusters? Remember the Goonies? Remember when neon used to be trendy? Remember the Where's the Beef Lady from Wendy's?
Here's the thing. At the end of the day, I don't really care about faith in adaptation, or at least not that kind. Somewhere inside me is still the little girl who wouldn't shut up about how the staircases don't physically move in Harry Potter. There's one line about how they sometimes lead different places on different days that just adds a little extra whimsy to the setting, but nobody is ever on a staircase that just starts moving. The people who didn't read the book are gonna think that the staircases move. This is a very important issue for some reason. But just like all the rest of me, that little girl has grown up, and unfortunately now needs to issue the obligatory reminder that Joanne and her work should never again be mentioned without the caveat that she is a Category 5 transphobe, and at minimum, any new adaptation of her work directly contributes to her attempts to make the world worse. Knock it off! I love adaptation. I think it is such an interesting task, and I love being able to notice the tiny details of what was cut, what was changed, what was included despite seeming inconsequential. And what growing up means in this sense is not just being able to point at that stuff, but to look at all of it in aggregate and ask why. And when I look at Where'd You Go Bernadette (parentheses film subheading 2019 American comedy drama film by Richard Linklater, that is the overall question I am left with. Why? For the sake of both comedy and drama, I'd like to tell you that I mean why? Like, on my knees, shaking my fist at the sky. Maybe the 500 Days of Bernadette cut would have gotten that out of me. That sounds a lot more interesting. But alas, this is a much more tired, bored, resigned kind of why. Because I know why. Why is that Where'd You Go Bernadette subheading 2012 novel by Maria Semple sold enough copies that a film adaptation was inevitable. Because for a film adaptation not to exist would be for money to remain on the table, which would have been preferable for everyone involved, it sounds like. 10.8 million worldwide against a budget of 20. Listen though, when I remember to put it that way, Where'd You Go Bernadette is really one of the last of a dying breed in that it made it to theaters at all. These days, this kind of popular fiction adaptation mostly lives and dies in the combined stuff buckets of your big five-ish streaming services, often drawn out into miniseries released with such frequency and so little fanfare that even as a person who is generally relatively up on these kinds of buzzy, book groupy, popcorny novels, I rarely find out about them until like 2 years later.
And then Lessons in Chemistry, which obviously got a movie TV show adaptation, which makes it so popular.
It did? What? A person who is not me might look at everything I've just said about Where'd You Go Bernadette and conclude that I would have preferred that its adaptation be relegated to the dusty back attic of Netflix, that it just missed its moment for everybody to be able to just kind of ignore that it happened, and for it probably to be removed from the platform and fully considered lost media within a few years, and that this would have been a preferable fate. That person would be wrong. Say what you will about Where'd You Go Bernadette (parentheses film subheading 2019 American comedy drama film by Richard Linklater), and clearly I will. I have willed for whatever godforsaken runtime we're at by now, but there is a tremendous humanity to everything that has gone wrong with it. Unsuccessful cash grab though it may in part be, this movie does not feel like second screen content intended to be just good enough to keep millions of people locked into monthly subscription fees for the privilege of having some noise in the background to keep them company while doom scrolling for 109 minutes at a time. This feels like a human work of art that is simply clumsy and sticky and just really, really bad in the way that sometimes happens when you have upwards of 300 people's metaphorical bodily fluids all sloshing around in the jug that's slated to get wedding at Cana. Sometimes what should be butter Chardonnay comes out the other side as barefoot Moscato, but it's still wine. And for that, what the hell? I love it. Plus, it's out here in the world on Blu-ray and DVD. You can just get it at your local library. It's too late, Richard. The billionaires can't write you off on their taxes anymore. We will all witness your shame forever. You have now watched enough of this video to mark yourself a true denizen of the Unhinged zone, and so I absolutely need to tell you about a television program with the most unhinged zone energy I have ever seen. And I hope it is not tooting my own horn too hard to say that I mean that as a wholehearted and whole-brained compliment. The elevator pitch for Amy's Dead End Dream House is that it's a kids show for adults created by and starring the inimitable Maggie Mayfish, which instantly and correctly brings to mind an irreverently whimsical energy. You know, Amy lives in an adorably colorful house and holds full conversations with her TV and her microwave and her pet snake and her cinder block, who requires no explanation. She's visited by an absolutely star-studded roster of neighbors, and it's for grown-ups, so she also smokes crayons like cigarettes, and her TV is horny for the wind, and there are commercial breaks selling drinkable lava lamps that will probably kill you. I promised you Unhinged. It would easily make my top 5 TV shows even if that were all, but it's not. Because Amy also faces real-life adult struggles that are almost certainly familiar to you, the viewer, like friend breakups and mental health diagnoses, and oppressive beauty standards, and the goddamn patriarchy, and she navigates them with the kind of compassion we all stopped believing we deserved somewhere around the age of 12. It's edgy, it's empathetic, it'll make you roll on the floor laughing with tears in your eyes and also love yourself again. Big words, I know, but I'm standing by them, and you can go on that whole journey exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming platform that's home to some of the most thoughtful creators on the internet, like Princess Weeks, Hello Future Me, Lily Alexander, and Lola Sebastian, who you've been hearing as the voices of Bernadette and Bee in this video, and me! Hi, Laura Crone, nice to meet you. You can watch all of our work ad-free and usually early, and there's a ton of exclusive stuff you won't find anywhere else. Independent prestige art like Patrick H. Willems' film The Dinner Plan and Wendover Productions docuseries Scav, which I have been absolutely addicted to. It's so good. More experimental products of complete creative freedom, like Innuendo Studios' weekly 1-minute entries into the definitive adventure game tier list, and my feature-length video essay in which I have kind of a complete mental breakdown about haunted houses that absolutely did not belong on YouTube. That's where I've been for the past year. I've been a little quiet about it, so you probably missed that memo, but you can catch up now on Nebula. Congratulations. When you sign up with my link at go.nebula.tv/Laura Crone, you can get a 3-day free trial to see just how much incredible stuff is available, because I don't have even close to enough time to mention it all, and then you'll get a 50% discount that brings the price down to $250 a month or $30 for a full year, which is an absurd deal and directly supports independent creators like me getting to make the kind of stuff we dream about making. Dream! Like Amy's Dead End Dream House! Use my link and watch it now!
Who is this queen? I love her.
I'm sort of picturing Elgin as a sort of like a Jason from Gilmore Girls, only less witty.
My dream has been to play a detective something.
We turned to see a I'm so sorry. I don't know why I keep laughing at this one.
Get him! No, not that. Don't use that one.
Okay, I was just reading the description for the next scene, and it's so crazy how far this guy is getting on the back of a single viral TED Talk. And that happens. That's crazy.
Thank you so much to my Patreon patrons for making this video possible, with an extra special thank you to Andreas Evans, Cassandra Barker, Eric Lewis, Glenn Sugden, Ilona Concetta, Jimbo, Kwong Yu Liu, Michelle, and Patrick Behringer. If you'd like to support my work directly and see updates, previews, and extended pieces of upcoming projects, you can do that at patreon.com/Laura Crone.